Hello, I'm John Maloof. Nice to see you here. This is Psych 101. We're talking about learning today. This is the first of two sessions. Project my voice a little bit here because I'm talking through this mask. We're going to talk about a number of things today that I hope you'll find useful and interesting, both. And so what might have practical value for you is we're going to talk about learning-related reasons to avoid addictive substances and gambling, which is parallel in some ways to addictive substances. How to overcome a phobia. Some of you may have a phobia, or you know someone who has a phobia. Phobias are very common. The best way to learn a new skill, and some of you will be learning a new skill. Any of you planning to go on in psychology? Raise your hand. A few of you, maybe others you don't know, but you will learn skills there, whether it's assessing individuals or providing them with therapy. Those are all skill-based activities. How to get others to do what you want. That sounds scary in a way, but we want people to do things. We want people to be nice to us, to cooperate with us, to help us when we are in need. We want our children to do what we ask and so on. So we want. And it comes up quite often. And we have employees, we want them to carry out their tasks and so on. So we'll talk about how to do that. And we'll talk about how to learn things with minimal effort. That's always good. You're putting in a lot of effort, I suppose, if you're learning a lot in the intro and in other units. There are ways to learn without putting a lot of your time and effort into it. But you need to be aware of them. All right, so we're going to talk about classical conditioning. And as we go through all these learning topics, I want to make one thing, I want to make my motive or my goal clear. I want to increase your power. I want you to increase your power to control yourself and to control others. That's what psychology is about. That's why people study psychology, is to learn that. And so I want to make you more powerful forever. So I want you to learn things today and tomorrow with me, and you'll learn other things too. But at least with me, I want you to learn things that you'll use in your life. That day, the next day, from then on. Learn some concepts, learn applications that make you more powerful. Knowledge, there's a saying that knowledge is power. Well, that's what I want for you. To have more knowledge and then to have more power to accomplish what you want in life. All right, we're going to start off talking about classical conditioning. It's classical conditioning. It's called classical, sometimes respondent conditioning, because it was the first type of conditioning written about by scientists anyway, who had done research on it. Who knows the story of Pavlov's dogs? You can't get through psychology unless you know about Pavlov's dogs. How did that work with the dogs? You know, give me any part of it. Oh, you're going to talk, and I'm going to give you a microphone to talk, so you'll be recorded, and you can sanitize your hands afterwards. Tell us your name.
My name's Annika.
Erica?
Annika.
One more time.
Annika.
Annika. Okay, I think I got it approximately. Okay? And so tell us something about the dogs.
So basically what he did was he conditioned dogs to salivate at the ring of the bell by giving them food to associate food with the sound of the bell.
That's right. There was a conditioning or a learning process going on. Now, when you show dogs meat, they will salivate. He developed this way of determining whether they were salivating, how much they were salivating. So that's unconditioned learning, or it's not unconditioned. I don't know if it's learning. It's an unconditioned response. There's no learning in it. It happens naturally for dogs. Sorry. So it happens naturally for dogs, but what he did, the genius of Pavlov, this Russian, was, what if you give them a certain stimulus right before you show them and let them smell the meat powder? What if you, for instance, rang a bell, the same bell, just before? Then you showed them the meat powder. And you paired that, and let's suppose you did that over and over several times. It could be a bell, and he did a bell, he did a buzzer. It didn't matter what the sound was, as long as it was somewhat unusual, and all those were unusual for dogs, as they are mostly for us too. And so you get this model here that you have the unconditioned stimulus, which is meat powder. That leads to the unconditioned response, no learning involved in that, salivation. Meat powder, salivation in the dogs. And then you start pairing the conditioned stimulus, as we call it, the bell. Give them the bell first, right before the meat powder. Bell, meat powder, bell, meat powder. You do that several times, and now you have a learning process that's classical conditioning. The bell does what? What does the bell do after several pairings? You said it too. Yeah.
The dogs will associate that with the food.
They will salivate. Yes, they'll. So we think they're associating, but what we actually observe is they salivate. So, and before, test them before, which is, I left out that, but I'm sure he did that. Test them before you ring a bell and the dogs don't do. They probably orient to it or have a startle reaction. And if you ring it several times, they don't have much of a reaction at all. They get used to it. But there's no salivation. Bell, 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 no salivation, no salivation, no salivation. The meat powder, salivation, meat powder, salivation. Then you combine the two. You put the bell first, right before the meat powder, bell, meat powder, bell, meat powder. Then you take the meat powder away and you just ring the bell. That's what was the conditioning. He showed, and this was a long time ago, over 100 years ago, one of the great first scientific efforts. Science hasn't been around that long, and he was part of it for sure. So he showed that you could teach a dog to, in essence, teach them or condition them to salivate if the bell rings. That's what was new and what was exciting about it. And so that's an explanation for conditioning of some emotions. If you have some frightening event and it's conditioned with something else, or it's paired with something else that happens right before, so you have some frightening or painful experience, you go to the dentist, for instance, and you have, when you're a child, and you have painful, turns out to be painful, whatever the work is, then you have this association, dentist and pain. And you don't want to go to the dentist anymore. And some people don't. They'll never go again. Their teeth are going to fall out of their heads. I don't know at what age, 40 or 50 or something like that. They're going to lose all their teeth, probably, because they won't go to the dentist because of what we call one trial learning. Dentist means pain. And it was just that dentist and that day and whatever the dentist was doing. But that's the learning. That's the conditioning of it. And so you have a conditioning. This is one only Pavlov was looking at dogs. We now think more importantly there's the conditioning of emotions for humans and for animals too. Animals can be frightened and have that sort of conditioning. Again, from just one trial or one experience. You can also have conditioning, some images here, of a positive element too. If you, for instance, your father is a very kind, loving, helpful person, always was reading to you as a child, encouraging you, praising you. You may then have this conditioning of someone who looks like that or speaks like that, or moves like that, has facial gestures like that, all these other elements that are associated with dad, you may then project those in essence onto other people and feel happy as you feel happy around dad who took care of you, comforted you. You may feel happy around other people who have that same tone of voice or facial expression or appearance in some way. Classical conditioning, we're associating, we're generalizing from one incident to other people. And that may be the conditioning of emotions. Both it can be positive and negative emotions. So we'll talk about some examples here, modern day. These happen to real people. You fall off a horse. Yes, anybody here fallen off a horse? Whoa, okay, two in the back. Yeah, did it hurt? Yeah, it's a long way down from most horses. And depends how you land. It can hurt a whole lot, and it can cause terrible injuries. But for most people, they're luckier than that. So you fall off a horse. That's an unconditioned response, an unconditioned stimulus. That whole situation, being on a horse and then coming off the horse, and then you're injured. The pain and the fear. There's a natural fear when you're falling. We want to right ourselves. We want to protect our head. We want to minimize the injury. Boy, there's not much learning that goes into that. That's just a natural reaction for living things. Humans, cats, dogs, and so on. So it's an unconditioned response of the discomfort, pain, and some sort of protective reaction to it. And what can happen is that sitting on a horse becomes the conditioned stimulus. Ordinarily, sitting, or before this incident, sitting on a horse had no effect on you emotionally. Maybe you're happy to do it. It was a fun thing to do. That's how I think about sitting on a horse, because I've not come off one. That would be fun, it'd be interesting, be exciting. But once you have this incident, because of the tremendous, very rapidly occurring pain, panic first, and then pain coming with it, and then more fear of how hurt am I? Is everything still moving? I move my feet, my toes, and so and my fingers. So you have the conditioned stimulus, which may then lead to the same emotional reaction, the same response as the actually falling off a horse. So after this one trial experience, after the pairing, you have this conditioning. So sitting on a horse makes you afraid. And I've had I had one client like that for sure, and that's what happened. And we'll talk about there's a old saying, you got to get back on the horse. We'll talk about why that's true. Maybe not on that horse. That horse is going to kill you, but back on a horse. We'll talk about in a little bit why that's true. Now, I had a client, really quite a memorable client in the United States. He was driving. I think he was working. He laid tiles, and he's going to a job, and he could see this huge truck, a semi-tractor trailer truck, and he was sort of going around him, and the truck would pass him. And I've had that sort of experience, not with the huge truck, but with a smaller truck in the United States. I don't know what it means. Get ahead and then slow down, and then you have to pass, and then that person passes you. So that's what was happening with him. And then on one of these exchanges, the huge truck was passing him, and he could see somehow, he had this vivid memory, he could see that in the side mirror, the truck driver was aware that he was going to cut off my client, and did cut off my client. It knocked him off the road, actually hit him and knocked him off the road, and he suffered a broken shoulder and other injuries like that. And he developed such a phobia from that of ever driving that he couldn't drive. And his lawyer sent him to me, and the question was, I was working as a psychologist then, the question was, will he ever be able to drive again? And if he can't do his work. And he's had enormous financial damages then, because he's making good money doing that, but if he can't drive, he can't do that work. And my answer wasn't a pleasing one for the lawyer. He can get over that. We can treat a phobia. He can be over it in a week. So I probably sent the client then to another psychologist trying to get a different answer. But I could see the conditioning there, the fear of that. Anybody ever watch the movie Duel? Steven Spielberg, his first movie. He had this situation in there of somehow a truck was trying to kill someone. So driving a tractor trailer, huge thing, and somebody in a vehicle and tried to run him off the road. That's what my client lived through. It wasn't fiction for him. And so that one trial that unconditioned stimulus of being hit by a huge vehicle, knocked and rolled and injured and broken, that created a tremendous amount of fear in him. That was now his conditioned response to sitting in a moving vehicle. Any of you been in an auto accident? Anybody been in an auto accident? I've been hit from behind. Yeah, I knew about this research. Someone just ran into me when I was stopped, legitimately stopped. And then I had a fear afterwards that whenever I stopped sometime, someone would come up and ram me from behind. And so I'd be looking in the mirror, take my foot a little bit off the brake pedal so I could roll forward if they did hit me, rather than just smash. And that lasted quite a while. Did you have any fears after?
I got T-boned at a crossroads, I got T-boned at a crossroads, so I was sort of from crossroads, so yeah.
So then you became nervous. All right, you got hit at a crossroad. Somebody came right through, yes. Yeah, boy, that happens all too often. And then you become anxious about. And as long as you keep driving, eventually the anxiety will go down. But if you give into it, in essence, then we'll talk about that in a little bit if we have time. It gets worse and worse than the anxiety. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Just for, I don't know, can you pass that way back? This is going way back, the microphone. You're all the stars of the show. Yes?
I wasn't involved in it, but at home, now we stop at traffic lights at roadworks. I get nervous because there was a couple crashing between two trucks at roadworks at home.
So you saw an accident happen?
No, we were good friends with the couple that were crushed between the two trucks.
Okay, you didn't witness it, but you heard about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I have to think about how that is explained in learning principles. It's not a conditioning of you, but it's sort of a modeling effect. The same thing, something similar happens is if there's a plane crash and a lot of people die, then people become nervous about flying. That's another kind of learning. They're learning that this is a dangerous thing, when it really isn't. It's the safest way to travel a long distance, flying in a commercial airliner anyway. Maybe a helicopter, I don't know, but in a commercial airliner, that's the way to go to be safe. But that's what, in essence, what they learn. Different learning principle there, though. I think that's a modeling, vicarious, you might call it. Well, I don't know if you need to know this term, but it's vicarious punishment, probably. That if you go do this, something bad is going to happen to you. All right, well, that's classical conditioning when you have some experience that leads naturally or without any learning to a negative emotion. If there's something else paired with it, that's something else that then may trigger the same response. And then we call it a conditioned response. And you see why we're calling it conditioned? It's a conditioned stimulus because sitting on a horse, in this example, didn't lead to any fear before. Now it does, and that fear is a conditioned response. It's the same, very similar to the unconditioned response. That's the power of conditioning, and that's what Pavlov, that's the sort of thing he was examining. All right, so what do we do about classically conditioned responses? All right. So how do we undo them? Learning can be unlearned. I hope that won't occur for you about what you're learning in here today. But things can fade and they can be replaced, basically, also. And so we can overcome, if we're talking about an unconditioned response that's a negative emotion, particularly is important, not just the negative emotion, but the behavior that goes with it, which is often avoidance and escape from the situation. Like someone who really loves horses but is afraid now to sit on a horse. That's unfortunate. If you're afraid to drive and you're driving as part of your lifestyle, boy, that's a bad situation. Phobias can be quite debilitating. So what do we do about it, or what actually can happen about it? And what you can do is that you can undo what's done. It's almost mathematical. It's like adding and subtracting. What you're going to do is then, there are a couple of possibilities. The dominant one, the one we most use in psychology, is, you might call it respondent extinction, or your textbook, I think, just talks about it as extinction. You present the CS. Sorry, somebody want to say something?
Oh, no, sorry.
Okay, you're just passing things around. I'm not sure who you're passing it to. Up front. You just hold on to it for a second, if you would, or put it down. That's all right. The microphone made a big trip around the room here. So what you want to do is use extinction, and the way to do that is to give the CS repeatedly without the UCS. So Pavlov, if he wanted to uncondition these dogs, would play that bell, or buzzer, whatever it was. Bell, nothing. Bell, nothing. Bell, nothing. I don't know how many times you have to do that with the dog once the conditioning has occurred. But if you do that about 20 times and perhaps space it over a few days, you're going to ring that bell and no salivation. It's over. Now, Pavlov, I don't know, I actually don't know what he said about this, but later people, decades later, said, we don't know what's going on inside the animal's mind. We can't tell. And then decades after that, others said, yeah, we can guess pretty well that this animal now, this dog has concluded the bell means nothing. I don't give a hoot about the bell. It doesn't give me any useful information. And so there's no salivation. Now that's probably going on unconsciously in the dog, but there is that sort of connection being made somehow in the brain, in the neurons. Bell doesn't matter any more now than it did before. Whatever I learned, it's over. That's how you can do it. And it may take a number of different trials where you're presenting the CS without the UCS. And then the animal, the dog, goes back to about normal before the conditioning. And so in essence, you've extinguished, that's why we use the term extinction. It's disappeared now. The learning doesn't exist anymore for that animal. Counter conditioning is a little bit different. Was for a long time used, still is used by many psychologists for that sort of phobic reaction, where you give a different conditioned stimulus right before the, you give the old conditioned stimulus, which might be sitting on a horse, but instead you're going to have a different UCS, a different unconditioned stimulus, such as tensing and relaxing your muscles or taking deep breaths. So these are relaxation methods, and as you pair the sitting on the horse with taking deep breaths or tensing and relaxing different muscle groups, what happens is you counter condition. So now the sitting on a horse is going to be associated in your mind, perhaps unconsciously or consciously in a human, with the relaxation. And so there's a competition there of the fear and the relaxation. And what you're hoping is the fear will win out. So rather than just unconditioning, deconditioning, it's counter conditioning. That's what we're calling that. I'm going to take my watch off to keep track of time. I get excited about these topics, but I have to keep marching on. That's classical conditioning. The next type of conditioning that was discovered by psychologists is operant conditioning. Ancient people knew, they probably didn't know about classical conditioning, but they may have known something about operant conditioning. But as far as actually doing research on it, that again goes back to maybe the 40s and 50s. And the textbook talks about different people, Watson and B.F. Skinner. B.F. Skinner is really the most famous person in all of learning. And the basic idea is that the consequences of behavior influence behavior. It's the law of effect that somebody had written about. was a great insight that what happens after you do something determines whether you do it again. And there are two types of consequences that matter. The two main types of consequences that matter, reinforcers and punishment. There's also this, what you might call extinction, that nothing happens after you do a behavior. The behavior is not likely to continue in the future then. If it doesn't lead to anything, you don't do it anymore. But if it does lead to something good, then you're likely to do it. So you see, like here we have that, boy, does that look delicious, but then I haven't had lunch yet. It's chocolate cake, I guess that's what it is, with strawberries on top. So you've never seen that before in your life, maybe because you're not from a developed country, and somebody gives you that and you think, oh, is this good? Are you going to want to eat that again? Yeah, you're going to want to eat that again. What you did is you ate something that looked chocolatey, that looked like a slice of something. It turned out to be a slice of heaven for you. So you're going to want to eat that food again. And this happens to us all the time. Some foods we like, some foods we dislike. What would I not eat? I can't even think of some of the foods I can't eat. But I can think of the ones I like. I'm a very big fan of, for nutritious food, carrots and peas. And so I find them sweet and delicious. So I look forward to eating those. I do go out of my way to eat those. I buy those. I spend money on those. Those are what I want. And you see how the consequence of my behavior of eating those, it was a good consequence. I really liked it. I liked the taste. I liked everything about it. The greenness of the peas. So I'm going to continue eating them. That's the consequence. Whereas if it's something else, like now I'm thinking eggplant and okra. Anybody ever had okra? It's more of an American food. But you've had eggplant? Yeah, I eat some things. Okay, there you go. Some people love these food items, but not me. So I eat them. It doesn't have a good consequence for me, for my taste buds. I don't like it, so I don't eat it again. You see how the consequence of the behavior of eating this food and that food, it controls what I do then in the future. And that's the law of effect. If we're reinforced for doing something, and you might think about for students, you're all spread out here nicely to keep from getting COVID. If you were to speak to another student, say before class, or if there was a break in the class, and the person smiled at you and spoke back whatever you're talking about, yes, 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 and so you had a conversation there, that would probably be reinforcing for you, right? And you might speak to that person again. If the person just grunts, and looks away from you, that's not so good. You're probably not going to speak to that person again because you didn't get what you would consider a pleasing response. You weren't reinforced, and maybe in a way you were punished because it seemed like a rejecting response. You don't know if it's rejected. Maybe the person doesn't understand what you're saying or couldn't hear you or something, or who knows. But you interpret it as being unpleasant, so you don't do that again, at least not with that person. And that's the law of effect. And this is very, very important because it's so powerful. Reinforcement and punishment. Reinforcement is the positive side, the light side, versus maybe the dark side of consequences. It's so powerful that when I teach my main unit, which is behavior modification, I tell them use that in every project. They all have to do a project to change behavior, either in themselves or in someone else. It's usually in someone else. But I want everybody using reinforcement in there because it's so powerful. And I want you to use reinforcement in your life. So somebody holds a door for you when you're carrying things. Somebody lends you a pen when your pen stops working. You probably want to reinforce that person. Express your appreciation for that. Somebody is nice to you. You want to show some gratitude for that or be nice back to that person. That's how you get, if we're talking about how do you get people to do what you want them to treat you well, to help you, to be nice, to be funny. Laugh at their jokes. commend them for their jokes. And if they help you get some information about a class, something you missed, that you missed a class and they're going to give you notes, you want to reinforce that behavior because you want to see that again. Now, if you don't understand about the law of effect, about reinforcement, you may skip that. You may take it for granted. And I bet if you were a child like me, when you grew up, you took everything your parents did for granted, didn't you? Didn't you just think that's what they do? That's what they have to do? Yeah, it takes a long time to get over that. You have to have your own kids till you realize, man, this is a lot of work. This is not that pleasant either, to do all this work. There's some bad stuff in here. Then you start to appreciate your own parents more. And then you might reinforce them. It's pretty late for the parents. You're on your own by then. It would be nice if the kids were, but it just doesn't happen very often. Kids don't appreciate it. They don't show appreciation for it. And so they don't use the power that they have to shape their parents. The parents, if they're well trained, if they've taken a class like this, they will use reinforcer. They'll catch little Johnny doing good, doing what they want, being nice to other kids, inviting other kids to come and play, working hard on a school project. They're going to praise him. Number one reinforcer is praise. They're going to praise him, give him a pat on the back, say, boy, that's how I was much older than you when I figured out. Work hard, get ahead, succeed. That's it. You're already doing it. You're 5. That's the ticket. You say stuff like that, it makes it more likely to happen in the future. You see the power of that? That's different from the parents who are whacking their kids 8, 10, 12 times a day. They're trying to apply punishment. It's probably not going to work as well as they might hope. It's not going to be so good. But we'll come back to punishment. All right, so that's operant conditioning. Mostly I'm going to suggest to you use reinforcement. When you see something you want to happen again, reinforce it. Usually with praise or some expression of gratitude. So let's talk about some examples of it. Here we have some clapping in the top image. You clap for people. If you appreciate their performance, you give them, you can clap for your pals who get a high score on an exam. You can clap for anybody. Anyone who does something either that you appreciate or that you admire or that you like, that you hope the person will keep doing. It may not benefit you at all, but you want the person to succeed in life because you care about the person. You're a decent human yourself. And so the person achieves something, maybe made a new friend or a personal best at running or something like that. You join in the happiness of that and help that person celebrate. That's part of reinforcing. You give them a little applause is one way to do it. That's one way we express praise. So that's often called positive reinforcement. Now there's this unfortunate term, negative reinforcement. Almost everyone who learns about this misunderstands it. I don't want you to be in that category. That category doesn't lead anywhere. I want you to understand what negative reinforcement is. First, just reinforcement. Reinforcement means there's some behavior, and after the behavior, something good happens to that person or to the animal. But let's just talk about humans now. Something good happens or some event after a behavior that increases the rate of the behavior or makes the behavior more likely to occur. You can look at it either way. So you see the three parts? Behavior, the event happens afterwards, the behavior becomes more likely. 1, 2, 3. That's reinforcement in general. Positive reinforcement is where that thing that happens afterwards, the event afterwards, is desirable. It's like getting applause or a pat on the back if you like that, or someone giving you a thumb up. That's the way to do it, Johnny. That's positive reinforcement. Negative reinforcement, everybody thinks, almost everyone in the world thinks this means punishment because it has this unfortunate word negative in there. And I wish we could just get rid of it and use a different term, but it's stuck. So we're stuck with it. I just want you to understand it. Negative reinforcement is still reinforcement. It means something good happens, But the thing that happens good after your behavior is some aversive stimulus goes down. That's the good event that happens afterwards, a negative reinforcement. And that's why we call it negative. Something negative decreases afterwards. And we like that. For instance, you get a splitting headache. I bet you've all had a headache at some time. And what do you, most of us, what do? We've been conditioned to do this through operant conditioning. What do we do when we get a terrible headache? It just won't go away. We take a painkiller. Does it kill your pain? Yeah, that's a pretty good name for it. Yeah, it kills your pain. And that killing of pain, the absence of pain, going all the way down to no pain, that's reinforcing. That's what keeps us taking that pill. Whenever we get a headache or a severe pain that lasts a while, then we take a painkiller of some sort. That's the reinforcer, and it's what we call negative reinforcer because our situation is better after the behavior of taking that pill. It's better in that the pain has disappeared. You see why that's reinforcing? Our situation has, our life has improved as a result of that behavior. So I don't use the term negative reinforcement. I would just say you're reinforced by taking the pill and having no pain then. Just as you're reinforced when somebody claps for you for doing something. Now, they're both in the same category of your situation is improved now because of what's happened. That's why they're both reinforcement. Punishment. Punishment is the last thing I talk about in behavior modification. I keep telling my students, no, you cannot use punishment in your behavior change project. No, 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 no. It's the last resort for many reasons, and we'll talk about those in just a little bit. First, you need to understand what punishment is. Here we have some more unfortunate terms, but you might see them on an exam, so it's good to know about them. And if you read the literature, if you go on in psychology, you will see these same terms. Positive punishment, you might think that's a good thing. No, that's a wrong one too. Positive punishment means that something aversive or bad is going to happen to you. So we just like this is all operant conditioning. We have a behavior, some event happens, it's an aversive event, and it decreases the rate of the behavior in the future. This is what parents are trying to do when they yell at their kids, which doesn't always work. But sometimes it works. Depends on the child, depends on the situation. Positive punishment, if we're using it as psychologists, we never hit anyone. Parents sometimes will hit, and that's very dangerous, very unpleasant for everybody, almost for everybody. But what we would do is we'd ask the person, why don't you give me, just like they do in the military, give me 15 push-ups. And that's unpleasant. It's unpleasant in part because it's physically taxing, but also because you're being pressured to do it and you don't really want to do it. So that's positive punishment. Or if you throw something against the wall, how would we use this? Let me give you a society example. You're caught putting graffiti on walls, like some foul word on the wall of a building. So then your punishment, positive punishment, is you're going to use this machine under direct observation to erase not just your graffiti, but to erase graffiti all over town. So you're going to work on this for hours at a tedious task. Does that sound punishing? Yeah, I want to get paid a lot to do that, but there's no pay for these people, for the delinquents who've done this. So that's a sort of positive punishment. You see how it's aversive, what happens to you after the behavior. Negative punishment, which you might think is worse, is actually milder. So if we're ever going to use this as psychologists or recommend this to parents, we would recommend negative punishment. What types of procedures are involved in negative punishment? Do you know some of the examples? All right, I'll give you some. Timeout? Who was put in timeout here? Yeah, you got timeout, yes. Timeouts, we have some timeout kids. How about, that's one, and timeout means timeout from reinforcement. So you go, what I do, I think I use this twice with my children, once for each child. It worked pretty well. You know, the punishment system is working when you never have to use it again. Go sit on the stairs, and our stairs faced a wall. Boy, is that boring. 5 minutes of that, and that had an impact. That's time out because there's nothing fun to do there. This is boring. People hate, even adults can't stand to be bored sitting on a wall, sitting on a step looking at a wall for 5 minutes. We can handle it more than kids. Seems like forever for a child. So that's time out, something like that. And those of you who had time out, did it work? Did it help change your behavior in the future? I see a nod, I'll take a nod. Yeah, it works pretty well. And it looks a lot better than whacking a kid, too. So timeout is one. Another one is response cost. Anybody had that? Do you know what response cost is? As a child, you lose the toys, you lose access to the computer, your cell phone. Nope, I'll take your cell phone for the next 2 hours. That's a response cost. What's that like in society? Well, timeout is it's a little similar to locking people up, except when we lock someone up as a society, it's for a long time. It's not for 5 minutes. Somewhat different purposes there for society to use it. And response cost, where you take something that the person has away, something that the person wants, what's that like in the criminal justice system? That's not locking you up, that's doing what? Sorry, say it again?
When your car is impounded?
When your car is impounded or you're fined. That's right. They take something away from you. Now, if it's a child, when parents are doing it, it's something minor. And again, it's usually something brief, too. Because kids can learn pretty quickly from a brief consequence. All right, so that's, see how these are unfortunate terms. Positive punishment means it's something aversive that's being applied to you, something external that you don't like. The negative punishment means we're taking something away. It's like we're subtracting something from you, but it's something good. You see how those terms are being used? You just have to memorize that is what I think. Think of some examples, though. And so what naturally occurs, I'm not sure why I got these slides from someone else who taught this topic before. The fireplace makes me think of a child who reaches up on a counter when he's a little guy and he pulls a steaming hot cup of coffee on himself. This happened to one little guy I knew. Burn the heck out of himself. That's positive punishment. No one planned that. That would be child abuse, but that's what happens naturally. There are lots of natural, you might say, reinforcers and punishers in life, and he got very unfortunate positive punishment there. And I would guess he'd be unlikely to reach up there again after that because that was so painful for so long. Now, we've talked about classical conditioning, operant conditioning. Both of these have two elements that are very important. One is stimulus generalization. The other one is stimulus discrimination. So the stimulus generalization is you get thrown off a horse, then you won't sit on any horse. You were thrown off one horse. It may have been a bad horse or a bad day or I don't know, something. And the same thing for the guy in the auto accident where he was run off the road. That was one truck out of millions of them who, total who run over a lifetime. You'll see millions of trucks perhaps, or hundreds of thousands. You're generalizing them from this one experience to all similar experiences like this. And that can become really very potent for you because you generalize it so much. So if you are sexually assaulted by a man who has a beard, what happens, let's say this happens to a woman, she can't stand to be around men with beards anymore. This was one man, one beard, But she's generalized this fear to all men who have beards. It could be to all men. That's a bigger generalization. It causes more trouble. So what does it mean if she has this fear around men who have beards? Well, can't date them, can't marry them, can't work for them. That's a real problem. That's the generalization that occurs in a phobic reaction there from classical conditioning. Stimulus discrimination, that's what we'd want her to do in treatment. It's to realize this is one man. There are lots of men. Freud had a beard. Lots of people have beards. And they don't sexually assault anyone. They certainly have not sexually assaulted you. You're sure of that. It was only one person. And what a frightening event that was. But that doesn't mean everyone is going to do it. So we want them to, now it's one thing to say that, it's another thing to actually make that discrimination. But that's what we do in life naturally. We make a discrimination that this was that truck driver and that truck, it's not every truck. And so most people then will get back to driving and they'll be around big trucks and there's no big problem there. They don't want to have any accidents. They don't want to go to jail for anything. They don't want to kill anybody. They just want to get somewhere and make some money driving that truck. So that's the stimulus discrimination. We try to, what some people do is they distinguish. So the woman who is sexually assaulted, she isn't afraid of all people. She's afraid of men with beards. Why? Because that beard was really on her mind at the time. Yeah, well, the man thing was, and certainly, and the beard thing was too. That was unusual for her to see that. She hadn't been around a lot of beard. So that's what sticks in her mind, and that's what gets generalized then. Very unfortunate when that happens. You can see the positive side too. We were talking about Dad. People who are like Dad, who is a nice dad, then we may marry someone like Dad. You probably heard of that concept. It's someone who has qualities or appearance or something, may even smell like Dad in some ways, the same cologne. That's stimulus generalization. Probably wise to, in many of those characteristics, to have some discrimination. This is not Dad. This is another person who may or may not act like Dad over the long run. Okay, that's stimulus discrimination. Let's talk about schedules of reinforcement. I'll try to do this quickly because I'm getting behind, as I often do. There are schedules of reinforcement, how often you get reinforced for something. Ratio is one of them, the textbook talks about. That means the number of responses. Like ratio response would be every 10th time you did something, you get a reinforcer. So you're nice to people, you're nice, you're helpful, you smile. Let's just put it this way. You smile at strangers on the street as you walk by them. What percentage of them will smile back at you? Maybe 1 out of 10 on average. It's not set exactly because this is a natural response. So that's a ratio schedule of reinforcement. An interval schedule is a little bit different. First, there's a time where you do the behavior and nothing's going to happen. After that time passes, though, then you can get reinforced. And so one example of that is looking at your cell phone. You look at it and then look at it again, it's not likely to have anything good, anything reinforcing happening, though. So if you go for a while, though, the odds go way up. That's then an interval schedule of reinforcement. Either one of these can be fixed in the sense, can be fixed by someone externally, but in real life, they tend to be variable. When you smile at people, is it 1 out of 10, 1 out of 20, 1 out of 2? That depends on you and where you are and a whole bunch of things. So most of life is variable schedules of reinforcement. And is it 1 out of 5 may be enough to keep you smiling at people? It may not be. Maybe you need 1 out of 2, or you're not going to do it anymore. Those are schedules of reinforcement. And I want to close today with gambling. Anybody know someone who has a gambling problem? Raise your hand. I don't see any heads or anything, or can't see well enough to see winks. Yeah, gambling is a huge problem. Australia may be the most country with the highest level of gambling. It's unbelievable how much people gamble here. And a certain percentage of them just ruin themselves. They lose everything. They borrow money. They steal money. Steal it from their family, steal it from their employer, and they gamble it right down the drain, lose everything they've stolen, and they go to jail, or something else bad happens to them. They lose their family, and so on. Why is that? Why is gambling so potent? It's almost like a drug. People also ruin themselves with drugs, methamphetamine, heroin, cocaine, tobacco, alcohol. Some people can use them once or a few times, but other people get hooked. And that happens with gambling. What is it about gambling? It's the variable ratio schedule. You ever done gambling? Yes. I guess I'm not going to encourage you because you might get hooked. But it is something to see. The gambling, the excitement of it, that you win sometimes. And this is all created in part from consultation with psychologists. How often do we have to have a small payout to keep people playing? If they play 100 times, putting money in, and they don't get anything, that's the end of that. They're not coming back. You need to give them some wins. You need to give them some of that back. You need to have bright lights. You need to have excitement. You need to have other people near them, or it's very helpful to have other people near them winning. And if you have the real machines, you have this clink, 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 and the gold coins are coming out. What could be more exciting than that? And you never know because of the variable ratio schedule. You never know. It could be the next time you're going to hit the big one and make a huge amount of money. Even though you've lost thousands, I can get it all back. All I have to next time could be it. I'll win it all back. That's the disastrous thought. And that thought comes from a variable ratio reinforcement. It's just brilliant how it's set up. Just like drugs are set up to get you addicted. We'll come back to those. That's enough for today. I'll see you tomorrow, I hope. Okay, now I will take, you've got it, thank you. Now, if you want, you can sanitize here or going outside, since probably various people have touched this. I keep everybody healthy.
Thank you.
Thank you, see ya.